Okay. Making sure no one's last minute reaching out. Okay, hi, welcome. I'm so excited that everyone's here today. I'm really excited and honored that so many people signed up. And I really hope that we can have fun today and share some wood veneer knowledge. So a little housekeeping, we are recording this. Like we just said, Carolina is my moderator and she'll be helping me out today. You can pin me so I'm the main screen and you don't see all the, like, the little grids and everything. And so yeah, if you want to turn your camera off, that's fine. If not, I'm going to also request that you mute yourself. And if you have any questions along the way, just type them in the chat. As I'm doing demos, I'm not going to be reading the chat, so Carolina can kind of read them off as they're relevant. And if they're a little bit longer, then I'm going to save them to the end. Okay. There we go. Okay. So, yay. In the spirit of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, I wanted to host this class. The project that I've been working on right now is based around women and overcoming adversity and women empowerment. And as I was working on this project, I didn't want to just make something that represented empowerment. I actually want to empower women. So that's why I'm doing this class. I also believe that, one, veneer is sublimely fun. I think it's a great medium. I think that everyone that tries it will love it. And two, I think that financial gatekeeping around knowledge is gross. And I think if you want to learn something, you shouldn't necessarily have to have a ton of money. So I just kind of wanted to like share what I know about veneer, and hopefully it will inspire other people to try it. So first thing is first, what is veneer? Veneer is just thin wood. It's cut very thin. It's really interesting practice to take the tree and you can cut it and then mill it down so it's all the same thickness. Commercially, they do it in a lot of really cool ways. Sometimes they just like kind of put it like on a log of a whole tree. They put it on a lathe pretty much and they spin it over a blade and it kind of rolls off like toilet paper, which is really cool. And there's a lot of different ways that it's created. You can also create it yourself. It won't ever be this thin, but you can resaw veneer, mill it down. I buy commercial veneer, which is pretty standard, and that's kind of what I've been using for the past few years, 3 or 4 years now. Yeah, so that's what it is. Why do we use veneer? We use veneer for a number of reasons. Veneer has been around for centuries. And one of the reasons why it started was just decoration. You know, we wanted to make something beautiful. In ancient Egypt, it was tombs. It could be anything you want to be decorative. Another reason is wood moves. We know that solid wood moves as throughout the year, the humidity rises and falls, and with that, the wood compresses and contracts. So you'll see a lot of antiques that are made out of solid wood that are broken. Just over time, the expansion and contraction eventually breaks them. So one of the reasons that we use veneer is because we can make something out of plywood that's more stable and then wrap it in veneer. So there's no way that that piece is going to ever break. Another reason why we use veneer, let's say we find this beautiful tree and we cut it down and we slice it open and we realize that it's really beautiful. If we made a desk out of solid wood, you might be able to have one desk. You know, you're going to have big chunks of logs. You know, you're going to have thick stock. If you cut it all into veneer, you'll have many, many, many layers. You'll have many sheets. So you could essentially make dozens of desks. So it's kind of just like a yield thing as well. And finally, how do we use veneer? There's multiple ways here in lots of conversations, but the dumbest, simplest way is you glue it down. And you can glue it down flat, you can glue it down over any kind of material, which is really fun. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you a quick little PowerPoint. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing.
Let me change that.
Thank you.
Okay, try now.
Okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Okay, so there are different terms based on the artistry around working with veneer. The first one is parquetry. It is the art of creating geometric mosaic patterns for furnishing and flooring. Common patterns include squares, triangles, diamonds, rhombus, star, chevron, and herringbone. Parquetry can be created using veneer cut with a knife or using thicker solid wood. So when we talked about commercial veneer that's really thin, you could use that, or you could use thicker resawn veneer. Parquetry dates back to the mid-1600s when large diagonal squares, known as parquet de Versailles, were used to replace marble flooring that required constant washing and tended to rot. So here are some examples of parquetry. It's really geometric. It's a lot of straight lines. Here are some more patterns. So you kind of have like this older, more traditional, that's been around for a lot of years. And then some of these like newer ones I find really fun that aren't like repeating patterns. They're just kind of everything. The next term to remember is marquetry. It is the art and craft of applying pieces of thin veneer to a structure to form decorative patterns, designs, or pictures. It is created by cutting multiple layers of veneer with a knife or a fret saw, assembling pieces together into a sheet and pressing to a surface. Marquetry and inlay were inspired by ancient crafts of intarsia. Intarsia is the making of decorative and pictorial mosaics by inlaying precious or exotic materials into or onto a groundwork of solid wood. 3,000 or so years ago, the Egyptians decorated much of their woodwork with inlay. So parquetry is more geometric and can be used with thicker stock. Marquetry here is almost anything, any kind of picture. In this example right here is a more traditional way of creating. You have multiple stacks of the veneer and you cut them all at the same time. So you could cut maybe like 5 sheets. And then down here, you can see they're all mixed up. The last term and practice is inlay. It is a practice of creating a pattern by removing materials from a solid surface and filling it with other materials such as wood, metal, or stone. Inlay dates back to ancient Egypt around 3000 BC. They could create works of well-made inlay materials with various kinds of colors such as glass, ivory, obsidian, quartz, and wood. So this would be like if you had a solid table and you took a router and you kind of just, carved into it whatever shape you wanted, and then you shoved wood or stones or quartz or anything you wanted to in the negative space. Here's a great working image where this is cut out and they're filling it in with these strips of veneer. Okay. Okay, so that's kind of the differences in the terms and the practices. A lot of times, and this is my pet peeve, a lot of times people would say, oh, I really love your inlay. They'll be like, thanks, that's not what I do. But it's like, that's a compliment. It's like saying to a painter, wow, I really like your drawing. Thanks. So yes, so let's get into some demos. The first thing I'm going to talk about is my knife. I use an Olfa knife. It's very affordable. You know, you can find it on Amazon. There are a lot of tools that I will blanket statement say are fancy and expensive, and you don't need them, especially if you're starting out. If this is a new medium for you that you just want to see if you like it at all, kind of use what you have. For the longest time, I used a box cutter, and I was shamed for it. People like definitely made fun of me for having a box cutter, but it was a little bit more difficult, but I made it happen because I wanted to. So this is what I use. You don't have to use it. That's fine. I'm going to mute myself real quick, and I'm going to change my view so that you can see what I'm working on. Okay. Also, speaking of financial access, yes, I did just put a piece of plywood over 2 boxes, and that's my stand. So here I have an array of veneer, and I'm just going to kind of start cutting it. I buy my veneer from a place called Certainly Wood, and they have a lot of different exotics, which is really lovely. And so all of these woods have different characteristics. What I'm also going to do too is I'm going to pop off the blade and get a fresh blade. If you don't have a knife and you are looking for one, you definitely want one that has the multiple blades that you can just pop off really quickly. These actually get dull pretty fast, so I like to remember that. And as I'm just starting to cut here, I'm just going to cut some strips. This is lace wood. It has a really strong grain, so it's really easy to kind of get stuck in the grain and have your knife travel with that, as opposed to having a nice straight line to the ruler. I will show you. As I'm cutting, I like to do very light passes and multiple passes. If I just did one straight cut, you can see that that's not very straight. You can see how my knife kind of traveled in the grain, and it's not going to be a very nice seam. So I'm just going to go back and clean that up. The key to cutting veneer is just a bunch of light passes. And I can also see here too, when I'm working with veneer, I like to pay attention to the grain line. So this is ambrosia maple, and I can see the grain is going in this direction. How I cut certain species and how I cut certain directions of the wood changes and varies. So here I'm cutting across the grain. I'm going to be going across the fibers that are stronger going this way. So it's going to be a little tougher to cut, but I have no risk of having my knife travel in the grain. Another thing about cutting cross grain too is that it's very easy for them to break. You know, it's not as easy for this to break because it just doesn't go in that direction. So if I wanted to cut kind of like a thin piece here, I would risk it breaking. So a good idea would be to back it with tape first. I'm just gonna match that up and do one. And cut some of this. If you're having trouble getting a straight line or getting a clean line when you're going with the grain, you can kind of turn your ruler slightly and kind of cut diagonal, and that'll help. Also, if you're cutting and you're kind of getting like little feathers or like little grains is kind of standing up, there's a number of things you can do. Chances are your blade is a little dull, so you could just pop off the blade to a new one, or you can take a sanding block and just hit it really quickly. Just a couple of swipes is enough. You don't want to do it too much because you can round it over, and that would also cause a not great seam. I'm just cutting strips right now. We're going to get to a pattern in a bit. So as I'm cutting with a knife, you know, it's not humanly possible to keep your hand at a perfect 90-degree angle. It would be nice, but it's impossible. So just naturally, I know that I'm kind of at an angle. I know that there's going to be a slight bevel on the side of this. As I'm gluing them up, it's kind of nice to think about if you have one bevel, you kind of want to match that bevel. You don't want it to be matched like this or like this. However, it's not that big of a deal. You can kind of pull them together with the tape, or you can hit it with the sanding block. And I just also like to kind of feel it, make sure there's no like chunks missing or anything like that. And I have this beautiful fumed eucalyptus that's extremely hard and really wild to sand. And fumed is really fun. It's when you take certain species of wood, has certain tannins, and so certain species of wood reacts to ammonia fumes. So this was just put in a room with ammonia, and it kind of like fumed into the fibers and changed the color. So I'm gonna kind of just, oh, here's a great example. So this did just break. It broke on the grain line. The great thing about veneer is that if it does break, you can just smash it back together and tape it down. I think that a lot of times people think that it's an intimidating medium because everything has to be perfect, but I will say nothing has to be perfect at all, ever, in any step of the project. There are always ways to fix things. So right now I'm kind of pushing them, together, squeezing them together, and I'm going to put the tape down. Essentially, the tape works like a butterfly bandage. It does have some give, so it stretches a little bit. So you stretch it over your pieces. And it kind of sucks them together a little bit, which is really nice, because if you have that little tiny bevel, this will just help it not show. And then I can, flip this over and put these on. I'll try and, squeeze them together here.
Chelsea, we have a question asking what type of tape do you recommend using?
Excellent question. I use painter's tape, just blue painter's tape. There is veneer tape, And veneer tape is really interesting. It's paper with a paper-like substance with adhesive on it. And when we talked about how wood contracts and with humidity it contracts and expands, same thing with just water. So if you just put water on a seam, all the fibers are going to expand. This veneer tape, you kind of put it on and then you wet it down and it sucks the seams together. I don't like that specific tape because it's extremely difficult to scratch off and pull up at the end, and it's a little bit more difficult to find. I just use blue tape. There's green tape, there's frog tape, there's a lot of other options out there. People complain that the blue tape is a little too aggressive on the fibers. You can really try anything, which is really great. Okay, so I've got kind of my fill here. You know, it's not perfect in all the places, and that's okay. A lot of times I like to create something and then kind of cut across it. So as I'm cutting here, I'm cutting over multiple species that have different hardnesses, they have different grain directions. So I'm going to cut through some of them faster than others. They're just going to be softer. So this is, you know, again, go really slow, do lots of layers. Oh, I didn't tape that down. Let's go back. There we go. Okay, and then I like to, you know, play around. How do I want to lay this out? And I'm going to go this way. As I'm working, I kind of try and keep the tape on one side, and I'll show you why at the end, but it's not that big of a deal if you don't. There we go. So I'm going to lightly put a little bit more tape on this back. So because this class is only an hour, I'm gonna have a lot of overview things to do and say. So I'm gonna move on from straight lines and talk about curves. So curves are something really fun that I have gotten into just actually a couple years ago. And something that I kind of discovered is that scissors are excellent. Scissors are great. And sometimes you can use it when cutting the veneer. So when you're cutting the veneer with scissors, sometimes it's difficult. You want to keep your scissors as perpendicular to the veneer as possible. If you kind of curve it, it kind of like gets all kind of bumpy and like a lot of the fibers come out. So I'm just going to cut very carefully. 1/2. And let's say I want it to go here. I'm just going to tape it down. And cut around it. So like we talked about before, I'm going through multiple species, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. It's going to take some time. And I'm going to cut everywhere that there's not tape first.
Chelsea, we have a couple of questions about the materials you're using. Is your ruler cork backed or steel?
It is just metal. It is cheap. It's one that I stole from my mom. Corkback is actually really excellent. It keeps it from sliding, especially if you're cutting multiple layers. Sometimes you want to have 2 layers on top of each other to make sure you get the right cut. And if you have a thinner ruler, it's going to kind of bounce over it. So corkback is great. I will say that I also have another ruler that is a right angle ruler, and I loved, and I realized that I had been cutting into it. So it kind of had like, it wasn't straight anymore. So if you keep using the same ruler and you don't have it, and you're not getting good seams, there's a chance that you cut into your ruler as well. And what kind of scissors are best? These are just paper scissors. Just a nice, you know, sharp scissors are great. You don't really need to have nice things or expensive things. It kind of just also has to do with technique as well. And getting that angle right. So also when you're doing curves too, I'm using a knife. A lot of people use fret saws, which are really fine saws, and they can get like really nice, sharp angles and corners and little details. Because I'm using a knife, it's doing the same thing that I talked about before, that my hand is instinctively turning. So because it's turning too, it's gonna kind of not be the best seam. So you just kind of have to pay attention to that. Also, if I'm going around a really tight curve, a lot of times I might just stipple into the wood. So I'll just take my knife point and press down, and just, you can kind of hear when you're breaking the fibers. And just, you know, get that. If you're starting out, you are 100% going to have the desire just to push through. And especially when you're like at the end of a cut and you've been swiping and swiping and swiping and it's not coming through, eventually you're just going to want to rip it. We all do it. We all want to do that. Fight that urge as best you can, because it's just going to rip out the fibers. Another thing too, if I'm, you know, cutting a piece and I'm having a lot of difficulty with, you know, it's just not coming out, sometimes I can flip it over and I can see the fibers that need to be cut. So that's pretty good. So I'm just gonna tape this on, and I'm gonna do it like the butterfly bandage. I'm gonna tape it to one side and stretch it and pull it over. Stretch and pull it over. And then I can take off this side. You're gonna have more of a chance to have gaps when you have this, you know, organic shape as opposed to just straight lines. And a lot of those are gonna be okay. You won't really see these tiny little gaps. I'm gonna try something really quick. Better, yeah, it's a little better. My curtains are really red and the sun's kind of shining in. Okay, what else? So, like a cooking show, I'm going to put this to the side and come over with my next step. So let's say we've got, you know, the piece done that we like it. And on the back, we have all this tape spread over and kind of like layers on top of each other. There's some places where the tape is like multiple layers thick. We don't want all of that. So as I was working, I know this is a mirrored image, but this is the face that I want to see when it's done. Let's say, you know, like there was a circle up here on the top left. So let's say I wanted that circle specifically on the top left. I would make sure to have this side, what I want to look at, and I sometimes even will make a little X on it, just so I know. That's the view I want. So this is the side that I'm going to cover the entire thing with tape. I'm going to cover it just with one layer of tape. And I want to kiss these up against each other. If there's a little gap between the tape, that's okay. You really don't want them overlapped. And this is a good time too to kind of feel out all my seams. I don't want any seams to be overlapping. You know, the wood, there can be little gaps between, same with the tape, but there can be little gaps between the wood, but you don't want the wood to be overlapping. Because if it's overlapping, you're going to kind of have this kind of piece, right? It's not going to lay flat. It's not going to sink down. If once you sand it, you're going to sand off this top piece, then you're going to have that little area that's just glue. So you're going to end up seeing a big chunk of glue.
Chelsea, have you ever used scalpels? Would they work for wood?
Scalpels. What are scalpels? For cutting.
For cutting.
No, I don't know. I don't know what that is.
They're like what they use
Oh,
in surgery.
yeah. Yeah, you could use those. The problem with that is you only have one blade, which you'd have to like replace, which is fine. But like just in my tutorial here, I already have chipped the point. So I would need to break this off now. These are also replacement blades, which aren't exactly as strong as the blades that came with the knife. So yeah, you could try it. You might have to replace them a lot. And I mean, once it gets kind of dull like this too, you just have to do more cuts and more swipes. But yeah, the box cutter that I used, that was dull and it still worked. I don't really like the mentality of just buy things and try it out, because a lot of people don't have that kind of money. They don't kind of have that kind of access. So I think using whatever you have first is best. Okay, so now I'm peeling off the tape, which is admittedly my least favorite part of the process. As I'm pulling up the tape, you know, it can pull out fibers. You can see here, there's some fibers on that. You want to make sure to kind of be gentle with it. It can also pull out little short grain areas. As I'm pulling too, I don't like to like rip off the whole thing aggressively. I kind of like to look at it too as I'm pulling, because sometimes you can pull out like a whole chunk of wood and not know. And I won't clean off this whole thing, but this is a great example. So I got this little corner here, and it is missing the piece. So, you know, there's no wood right here. I don't know if I pulled it out when I was taping it. I don't know if it was a short grain piece that just popped out. Anyways, the point is, this is not ruined. This is a great way that we can fix things. So I could either go and find this same gray poplar and kind of fit it in, or I can pick something totally different. And I'm just gonna pick this. Got like this kind of pretty maple. If I wanted to match up with the poplar, I would have to make sure that I have the grain running in the right direction. You know, in this triangle, it's kind of running in this direction, so I just have to match that up. But since I'm picking a completely different piece, I can kind of do whatever I want. So what I'm going to attempt to do is get 2 angles correct on this piece. So I'm going to kind of hold it there and just kind of guess at this other angle and cut it with a knife. And I can see that looks pretty good. So because I've been doing this for a while, I'm just kind of pushing it into the seam and guessing where this is. If you wanted to put a little piece of tape on it, you could, you know, on this side. But I'm just going to go fast and loose right now. So there we go, that's pushed in. The great thing about wood, you know, we worry about wood moisture and movement, but with veneer, it's really excellent. We can actually use it to our benefit. If we want, you know, little gaps to be filled in, we can use certain glue and then they will expand, which is, you know, a fun little trick. Okay, so with that being said, we're gonna pretend like we've got one whole back that's covered in tape and one whole front that's open without any tape. And now we're going to prepare to glue. I use Titebond 3 for a number of reasons. First of all, the color, it's brown. Titebond 1 and 2 are very yellow. And when you're sanding, if you don't get all of Titebond 1 or 2 off, once you put the finish on, it can be very aggressive and very glaringly obvious. So I like 3 for that reason. I also use wood glue because there's water in it. So when we talked about these seams, once you add this glue, the seams are going to expand. And they'll expand with the grain. So we have our piece here. The grain is going in this direction. The fibers are going to expand this way, but not this way. They're going to get better, not taller. So if I'm looking at this piece as well, this little triangle, the grain is going in this direction. So it can expand this way. So there's like little, you know, little things that can be pulled together by the tape, little things that can be sanded to get the seams nice and straight, and then the glue, which will really help too. And I know that, you know, we use epoxy. A lot of people use epoxy. It is really nice, but there's no water in epoxy. So whenever I've used it, I always see the lines. And most people won't. A lot of non-woodworkers won't see it, but I see it and it drives me nuts. So, yeah. Okay, so then gluing down. It's very important to get everything set up before you actually open the glue. A good trick, so a lot of the things I'm telling you today are things that I have played around with that, you know, you can decide what you want to do. This is a trick, hard and true, that you should follow. This is framing mat. When you buy a picture frame and it has that mat, this is what it is. You can also get like a whole sheet of it. This is very important when it comes to gluing things down because veneer has different thicknesses. You know, when you buy commercial veneer, you think it's going to be all the same thickness. It's actually not. It really just depends on the species. So if you have 2 veneers, one's thicker and one's thinner, you want to have equal pressure on all of them. So you want to have this board that kind of will compress. So if you have, you know, this thin veneer, you have all this air space. You need to have pressure on that. So get some mat board, get some clear plastic, and then you can glue it down. I know my mat board's not big enough for this scenario. I always, when I was, well, I still am poor, but when I was starting out too, I would just clamp it to my table, my kitchen table. So another thing about clamping is you need cauls. So a caul, C-A-U-L, is just something to kind of clamp onto your piece so you can get equal pressure. The glue up for veneer is very tricky and can take some practice. I've had a lot of pieces where I glued it up and it just didn't work and I had to throw it out. The mat board will help with that, and cauls. So if you just took a clamp and you clamped it onto your substrate, which is, you know, whatever you're gluing it to, there's a chance you could dent the corners, you could dent whatever you're kind of clamping onto, And also when you're clamping, it only radiates out from a certain position. So you got your clamp here. If you clamp it just with the substrate, it'll only radiate out from that corner. But if you put a caul on it, it'll radiate out from the caul. So I would do this piece on the corner of my table with just 2 clamps right in the 2 corners. If you have something bigger, you're going to want to use more clamps, you know, big chunks of wood that go all the way across. You can also use a vacuum bag, which is what I have. It's a 4-foot by 4-foot bag, and you slide it in, and all the air is sucked out and it's pressed down evenly. The bigger you get, the more you have to worry about things warping. This is pretty small. I wouldn't be too concerned about this. Whatever it is that I'm going to use it for, it won't warp that much. So, yes, we would put our pressing mat down, then the plastic, then the veneer, pretend there's not all this tape on it, then your substrate, and your cauls. Make sure to practice that before you actually open the glue. I've had many times where it's like, oh my gosh, I don't have the right clamps, and then, you know, the glue is drying, and yeah. So I'm not going to actually glue this piece today, but I will show you the amount of glue that you want to use. A lot of people will say that you want to glue the substrate and the veneer. I do not do that. I just put glue on the substrate. If you're putting, ooh, that was too much. If you're, my camera stopped.
Chelsea, we lost your.
If you're putting glue on the veneer and you're wiping it over, there's a chance that you know, you could get glue in the seams. There's a chance that you could pull up fibers or any little pieces. So you want to just put it on the substrate and then put the veneer on. Okay. So when you're gluing, you want to get every little area.
Hey, Chelsea, I just wanted to give you a 15-minute warning.
Yes.
To 2, and we also have a question that asked, do you use cauls in the vacuum bag?
No, you don't use cauls in the vacuum bag. You just use the cauls with the clamps. Also, because this is such a short class, if you have any questions, I don't think I'm going to be able to answer them in this meeting, but if you want to put them in the chat, then I can send up a follow-up email. So this is about how much glue you want to use. I can tip it to the side. It's not dripping, but I can see that I got every little space. The glue on, flip it over. Okay. And then next stop in our cooking show, we have the piece that we pulled out. So you're going to take the tape off, and as you're doing this, you're going to want to be really careful about it because it can pull out fibers and it can pull out little pieces. I'm going to be a little aggressive because I want it to make a mistake. Of course, it's not, which always happens. So if you're pulling this out, it can pull up big chunks of the wood. The great thing is, again, like we talked about, there are so many ways that you can fix veneer. There are so many steps that you can fix it and it won't be, you don't have to throw it out. So, you know, I've got some fibers right there. If I got some big chunks of fibers, I could keep this tape down, put a little bit more glue in it, and then tape it back and leave it clamped. So yeah, and same thing, like if you pull up fibers like this, you know, you've got a couple of them on there, but you don't see the plywood, most of the time you can just sand that through. So you have your piece, you know, it's all different species. These are all different hardnesses. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to sand it. What I usually do is if it's small, I can do a hand block or I can use my power sander, but I just buff it, you know? And I'll do circles and then maybe I'll do like horizontal and then vertical. Unfortunately, because, you know, we played around with all these different motifs, we can't sand with the grain in all areas. So, you know, you kind of have to just kind of buff it. A lot of the times I'll start with 120 and then I'll go to 220. And a lot of times that'll be fine. If I'm still seeing certain species are getting a lot of the cross grain scratches, then I might go higher. Otherwise, I will go back in and do individual little sections if I have to. But for the most part, it's really nice and easy. And as you're sanding too, you want to stop often to kind of look and say, okay, am I sanding through any certain species? This is a fir, and we've got cedar, which are both very soft. So even though I have it clamped flat and it's flush, there's still a chance that you can sand through one species and not the next one. So it's good to kind of pay attention to that. Also, if you have like a big chunk that's missing as well, this is a good time where you can go back in. You know, if you didn't perfectly lay your glue out, then you can go back in and kind of cut a chunk out. You know, you could use your chisel, you could use your knife, kind of cut a little area out, and that would be inlay. So you could, you know, oh, I don't really like that little bit, kind of get in there, get it out, and then you can fill it back in. Okay, I'm gonna flip my camera back. So that was an extremely fast, extremely quick overview of veneer. And I want to add too that I have had a, you know, pretty poor, you know, when I was starting out with this, I didn't want to go out and buy things. I didn't want to go out and buy all the materials and all the tools and everything, just in case I didn't really love it. And I was still kind of playing around. So there are ways to get around this, to try little things here and there for these, you know, free community classes that are really excellent that are popping up, to learn things without really having an investment or having any financial stake in this. For larger veneer projects, at what point do you worry about warping, if at all? Yes. So I will also say that larger projects do have more of a chance to warp. You can veneer to anything. You can veneer to plywood, which is what I normally do, or you can do it to particle board or MDF, or you could do it to solid wood. And all of them have different tendencies. So if I'm just doing a little guy like this, it won't warp that much. If I was doing a bigger one, there are ways that I can stop it from warping. Traditionally, when you're veneering, you want to veneer the front and the back, because you're creating these glue lines and you want the moisture to enter both sides evenly. If you just do one side, there's a chance that it can warp. That's a rule that I sometimes skip for a number of reasons. If I'm doing a bigger piece and it's trapped in a frame, or if it's in a panel, you know, the frame is going to keep it from warping. There are other things too that you can do. I'm doing a piece right now where visually I want the grain on the front and the back to be vertical, which is not great. But I am just leaving it clamped every day, all day. I'll pull it out, sand it, work on it, clamp it back flat again. And hopefully it would cure flat, you know, because there's a difference. If you leave this clamped for like 8 hours, the glue will be dry, but it's not fully cured underneath that layer of veneer. So yeah, larger projects you should definitely think about either veneering the back or trapping it in a frame. How do some of the pieces shown earlier get colors like blue or green? Well, this blue is dyed. I bought it dyed. But this purple is aromatic cedar, and it's just purple. It's really beautiful. This fumed is naturally, it's kind of closer to like a maple color, the eucalyptus, but because it's fumed with the ammonia, it got this dark color. So there are some that are dyed that I love to mix in there. Do you ever iron out wavy bubble veneer? There are ways. So there is a veneer softener that you can buy, or I believe you can make it. So if you have like a drier veneer or a really figured veneer, it looks crusty and it's kind of like bumpy and everything. So this spray, you spray it on, I'm not exactly sure what's in it. Water and some kind of like wood version of aloe vera. So you kind of spray it on and then you can press it down. You don't have to clamp it, but like spray it on, maybe put some books on it and everything. And it gets really soft and supple and easy to cut, and it's really flat. But that only lasts like a day, and then it gets warped again. So if you do, you can cut your pieces, get them taped down. You don't necessarily have to glue it down that day because you know that it's nice and flat. But yeah, I haven't used that before because most of my pieces so far in the motifs are small. So, you know, I do kind of like smaller pieces of veneer that like I can just press that flat with my hand. But if I was going to do a bigger piece, yeah, flattening would be good. What do you use to finish the surface? I use spray lacquer. I know environmentally, it's a terrible answer, but it is kind of, for me, idiot proof. I'm not great with hand applied finishes. I always get it like bumpy or streaky, so I like the spray. I really like lacquer too. I think it has a really nice solid content, and I think it like builds up really nicely. The other thing too about the Titebond 3 and the lacquer together, they really complement each other, and you just don't see the glue. It's really nice. If something's like a little imperfect with my sanding, this finish doesn't highlight it. I have done shellac before, hand applied and spray, and I like it. Don't love it. And oil too. I've done oil on solid pieces of wood, which is really lovely and has a really nice hand finish, but the oil won't permeate the glue line. So it's not soaking in, it's just kind of like sitting on top. So I don't know if that's even that great of a finish. Okay, did I get all the questions? I was like running out of time and nervous.
We do have one that was missed. Are veneers sold in packs of different kinds of wood? And then I kind of wanted to add in there too, if maybe you could link the place that you said you bought wood from.
So I'll put it in the chat. So there's a number of ways you can buy a veneer. You can, you have a 15-foot tree, right? You can cut and have these long, 15-foot strips that you can have them rolled up and mailed to you that way, which is really nice. And they have them all layered too. So you have like this tree and all the layers are exactly next to each other. So if you're making like one giant tabletop and you want it all to look like the same, no patterns, that would be the best way to do it. I also love Certainly Wood because they have a shorts box, which is not short. It's like 2.5, 3 feet. And they have an exotic box and a domestic box, and it's kind of like free-for-all what they have at the time. And I've gotten both of them, and they're really nice. It's usually about like 8 to 10 different species and like 8 to 10 sheets of each species. So you get a lot, and it's only $60. And I've been working with these. I bought a domestic and an exotic veneer box like a year and a half ago, and I still have plenty left. I know for people who are just starting out, they don't want that much veneer. there are ways you can get it, like smaller packets. And yeah, I think you can get like smaller packets. Sometimes it's more money, but you know, it's whatever you want. Thank you, Natalie, for putting that in. And certainly wood is really great too. You can look on their website, but obviously all trees are different. I bought some black limba 2 different times, 2 different trees. They don't look anything alike. So it's really, you know, kind of what you want. And they're really great on the phone. You can call them up and tell them, you know, I'm a beginner, I'm starting out. I want some soft woods. I want some easy woods to cut. Or you could call them up and say like, I want something that looks like this or has this kind of feel, and they're really great to help. Yeah, but it's really fun. I have on my Instagram, I feel like most of you found me from Instagram, I do have those highlighted stories that are saved, and they go way deeper in depth with cutting and gluing and everything. So if you wanted to revisit that, I have that. They're also up on YouTube. So embarrassing. Everyone hates their voice, but yeah, hate my accent. And of course, like, I love questions. If you guys just want to like hit me up with random questions, if you start to do this, please feel free. I would love to, you know, nerd out on that. Have you gotten scraps from local cabinetry or furniture shops? Yes. I worked at a cabinet shop in Maine, and that's really how I started out. I went through their dumpster, and I was getting resawn pieces that were like, you know, 1/8 inch thick, and that's what I was starting out at. And then I ended up having to leave. Oh, everyone that's jumping off, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Please email me if you have any questions. But yes, and then I had to leave that shop, so then I started working with commercial veneer. But yes, okay, please email me if you have any questions. I'm so glad that so many people came on. This was so much fun. I hope that people learned something and that they are inspired to try a new medium. Thank you. And Carolina, do I need to do anything?